Mavericks. Thanks to our sponsors here that have us on Radio Row: Wild Fork Foods, On Time Experts, Air Conditioning and Plumbing, and Best Buy Windows and Siding. As Tim MacMahon, ESPN, joins you now here on The Fan. And a good evening, sir. How you doing?
Howdy, partners. How you guys doing?
Well, doing good. Can't wait to pick your brain about this. What ultimately led to their decision that this was a good enough package to take for them?
I mean, look, they wanted three things out of an AD deal. They wanted financial relief. They wanted draft compensation. They wanted young talent. They got a lot of financial relief, middling draft capital, and a flyer on a young guy. Not a lot of young talent. But, look, man, the fact that they were not only able to get off of AD's contract, kind of turn the page there, but get off of Jaden Hardy's contract, get off of D'Angelo Russell's contract, go from the fourth highest payroll on a team headed for a lottery pick to under the tax, create a lot of flexibility this summer. This was a trade that was about positioning the franchise to really begin its build around Cooper Flag, and I think that's how the Mavericks had to view this piece of business. Obviously, if you attach this trade and evaluate it based on what they gave up to get Anthony Davis, it's a disaster. But they were not going to make an AD trade that was going to make the Luka deal any better. That was a sunken cost. They got the gift of another prodigy to build around, so they had to view their business through that prism. And this is all about, creating the kind of flexibility that they needed to begin what's going to be a challenging build around Cooper, just because of the picks that are already at the door for the Mavericks.
Tim, were you surprised this happened today, and were you surprised that it was the Wizards and not another team?
Yes, I was surprised that it was the Wizards. The two teams that I was aware of that they'd had the most in-depth discussions with were the Raptors and the Hawks. The Hawks had kind of bowed out, but there was an anticipation that the Hawks should have been coming late, maybe with an offer that was only expiring contracts, no draft picks involved. The Raptors I always felt like was going to be a tough fit because they don't. The Mavericks were going to have to take back a lot of money in that deal. And I can tell you, I was surprised. I believe AD and his agent, Rich Paul, were also surprised that it was the Wizards. This is not a deal that Rich Paul helped put together.
Tim MacMahon here with you on The Fan. So what happens next here? Do you think anything else could happen in the next 20 hours?
Listen, I'm always going to leave that open-ended. They've obviously had discussions about other players, Daniel Gafford primarily. What I would say, though, is this certainly eliminates there was really a need for them to shed salary going into this deadline. They've shed so much salary that there's not pressure there. They're under the tax this year. They're very well positioned financially going into next year. This really did a lot in terms of just cleaning up the books. And that stuff's not exciting for fans. That's not something that you're going to use to sell season tickets. But what is exciting to fans is saying, okay, hey, everything is about building around Cooper Flag, and that kid's obviously amazing. But, do they find a deal for Gafford? I do think they're going to need real draft compensation to do something there. Same with Najee Marshall. So I'm not going to say they're done with their business, but I would say the pressure to shed salary has definitely been eliminated.
Tim, you mentioned that they made the move, but who was driving the bus on this one? You said the agent not involved really in the move, but is there, from the Mavs standpoint, was there somebody particular that was leading the charge on this one?
Yeah, I really think that this is a Matt Riccardi deal. And, obviously this is a young, ambitious executive who had been an assistant GM, is in that co-GM chair on an interim basis. And a very challenging situation. He worked alongside Michael Finley, but I believe that the majority of the negotiating on this one was done by Riccardi. And, it's not a sexy trade by any, by any stretch. I think it is a very sensible deal. I think it is a deal that other executives around, I know it's a deal other executives around the league are looking at and saying, hey, considering the circumstances, that's a good piece of business for the Mavericks.
Tim, do you think, does Jason Kidd have GM sort of aspirations?
It's a good question for me to ask Jason Kidd. I don't know. I mean, he does a press conference before every game and after every game. I invite you to show up and ask him that. What I would say is that he certainly has had those kind of ambitions in the past, so I think it is a logical question.
Tim, we worried for a long time about the Mavs' inability to attract free agents. I think that was a fear after the Luka trade as well. Like, my gosh, they're going to trade Luka Doncic. Why would I want to go play for that organization? The Cooper flag effect, and then now you've added cap space. Is this a desirable team that you think would attract free agents?
I think that it can be. Certainly, I do believe that Cooper is the kind of guy that people will want to play with. I mean, listen, man, what he's doing is really historic for a rookie, much less for a teenager. He's got a chance to be a perennial MVP type of guy. I mean, there's really not a ceiling on him. I would say, look, there's always going to be exceptions here. I would say free agency is become a very difficult route to really build a team as your primary tool. I think it's more of a complementary tool. Like, when's the last time a star moved in free agency? Oh, yeah, it was probably Jalen Brunson to the Knicks, not to bring up other bad Mavericks memories. But you know what I'm saying? Just the way the league is now.
Right.
Typically, there's extensions. There's kind of players use the trade market almost as a form of free agency. But there is definitely value in having financial flexibility with the way the CBA is structured, especially dude, the Mavericks were the fourth highest payroll in the league.
Gosh.
And they have, right now they're sitting with the seventh worst record. You can't do that. If you're going to be that expensive and have all those restrictions on roster building, you better be a contender. And obviously, they weren't close. So it's a long way of me saying, yes, I think the Mavericks can be attractive in free agency, but I don't necessarily know that free agency is an attractive way to have as your primary tool.
Tim MacMahon, ESPN, with us here in the G-Bag Nation. Tim, where are we at in the relationship with Dirk and the franchise right now?
I would say that certainly olive branches have been extended to Dirk, and we've seen him accept them. The fact that he showed up to a game early in the season, somewhere in a Cooper flag jersey, that was a major step. I mean, the only game he came to last year was Luka's return as far as games at the AAC. He was right there for Mark Aguirre's ceremony. To my knowledge, there have not been any kind of real discussions about what a role for him might look like with the franchise. But I think there's an understanding that there is interest in having him have some type of a role, and that would. And my understanding also is that, for Dirk, if he's going to have a role in the franchise, he doesn't want it just to be, like the homecoming king who comes and waves to the crowd every once in a while. He'd want to be in a situation where he has real input. But again, that's all very, very early. What I can say is the firing of Nico Harrison opened the door for Dirk to be involved in the organization in some way, shape, or form.
What's the latest on Kyrie?
Really just, he is ramping up to return to practice. That likely happens at some point after the All-Star break. I would still say it's very TBD on whether he returns to games this season, and that's for a variety of reasons. One, you've got to check all the physical boxes, all the mental boxes on actually being ready to get back in game action. And then two, do you think it benefits the Mavericks to win a few more games this year? Or do you think maybe the one draft pick they have of their own that they control on Cooper's rookie contract being this year in a loaded draft, but maybe, not winning and maximizing your lottery odds might be a pretty wise path.
Mm-hmm.
When Kyrie is back statistically for Cooper flag, do you think that makes him more productive? Does it take the ball out of his hands and make him less statistically productive? How do you think that whole thing is going to go?
Honestly, man, I think that Kyrie and Cooper will, for however long that is a pairing, I think they'll find a way to fit very well together. Cooper is not a point guard. He is handling a lot of the point guard responsibilities, kind of uniquely sharing them, I would say, right now with Najee Marshall, who's also not a point guard. But I think, ideally, you do want a guard who's a very good creator, who's also comfortable playing off the ball and, can catch and shoot when he's not initiating offense. That is a very good fit with Cooper Flag. I mean, what you'd really love is a 10-year younger version of Kyrie Irving. But I think Kyrie just enhances what Cooper's doing, when Kyrie's ready to be back on the floor. And again, if you're asking me to guess, I think that's probably in terms of game action next season, but that's not a certainty.
Is it a pipe dream to wonder if maybe we can get a Luka, LeBron-like return later in his career?
I mean, stranger things have happened. What I would tell you is I don't think that Luka is eager to leave the Lakers anytime soon. The Lakers have a pretty good track record over the year of when they get a superstar, being able to build a contender around them. They do have a few advantages as the league's most glamorous franchise located in Los Angeles. Listen, man, they fired Nico Harrison, but I think there's still some folks left in the organization in prominent roles that Luka's maybe not eager to reunite with.
That's fair. I think we pick up what you're putting down there as Tim McMahon's with us here on The Fan. Does the Cooper Flag timeline involve trying to get rid of everybody like in their prime or after their prime, or can there be like a middle ground where you're building around him, but you're also trying to compete more going forward immediately?
I mean, ideally, there is a middle ground because, listen, this is the 1 year on his rookie deal that they benefit from being bad. Next year, the pick is out the door unless it's top two. Right? That's the Charlotte Hornets pick. The year after that, it's a swap with Oklahoma City. I'm here to tell you, they'll probably end up with a pretty late first-round pick in that case, and you hope not to give up a high lottery pick. 29, the Rockets now own. 30, a swap with the Spurs. They're probably going to be pretty good then, too. So they want to be competitive next season. That's part of the reason that, to this point, they have shown absolutely zero interest in entertaining trade discussions with Kyrie. I can't promise that Kyrie is going to be here for 3 or 4 years, but I do believe he'll at least be here next season. And the other thing, look, man, you want Cooper Flag. He's a competitive guy. You want him in a position where he feels like he has a chance to win every time that he's out there on the floor. You want him to be playing meaningful games late in the season, hopefully into the postseason, because that's going to, help his development as a franchise player. So, they very much hope to find that middle ground. That might be easier said than done, but that's the hope.
Is there truth that they're not going to do another deal with the Lakers anytime soon?
I've seen that reported. I haven't confirmed that myself. I can understand the hesitancy. I would say, though, there's only 29 other teams in the NBA, and I think you've got to do what's best for your business, regardless of what's happened in the past. And listen, man, I'll just give you an example. The Lakers, they ended up squashing the deal, but they gave up a pick and a swap for Mark Williams last year. If the Lakers were going to call the Mavericks and offer, we can talk about what players, expiring salary or whatever you want in there, but if they're going to offer a pick and a swap for Daniel Gafford right now, I think if you're the Mavericks, you have to seriously consider that.
How important?
That's a hypothetical. To be clear. But my point is, saying we're never going to deal with the team again because, man, they robbed us. That's a pretty short-sighted way of thinking.
I would be surprised if they would move Gafford if they want to win next year. But is he not as important for winning without Luka?
That's of the many, many, many things that were ill-conceived with the Luka deal. You did drastically reduce the value of your two centers, right? I mean, Gafford and Lively unfortunately has some obvious major injury issues. Gafford's has some durability issues too, but those guys Luka maximized them. They are rim running big men. They are great pick and roll partners for the best pick and roll player in the league. So, they're not as valuable now to the Mavericks, even if they are healthy, as they were when they had Luka. That doesn't, I don't think the Mavericks are desperate to dump Daniel Gafford by any stretch of the imagination. Certainly they've had a lot of trade discussions about him, but I don't think it's a case where they're like, okay, hey, we got to get rid of this guy. I would say, that's far from the reality.
Where are Middleton and Bagley? Are these guys just playing this year out and moving on?
I mean, listen, the harsh truth is their value to the Mavericks is that they're expiring contracts. Middleton obviously has some history with J. Kidd. They were together in Milwaukee for a while. He's got a reputation of being a great vet. I think he's a guy, I don't know him personally, but based on what I know about him, I do think he's, the kind of vet that you want. I'm not saying mentoring Cooper, but, sharing some wisdom with him, that sort of thing with Cooper, with Max Christie, some of the other young guys on the roster. But this trade was first and foremost about financial relief, and those guys are expiring contracts. But if you want to, be rosy about this, you can say the Mavericks turned the number 3 overall pick in that 2018 draft into Max Christie, now multiple first-round picks and the number 2 overall pick. So, I'll let you guys paint Marvin Bagley third as an upgrade.
You paint a hell of a picture. Thank you so much for making time for us.
All right, appreciate it, fellas.
See ya. There he goes, Tim MacMahon, ESPN, with you here in the G-Bag Nation as Anthony Davis traded around lunchtime today to the Wizards for 4 players and 2 future first-round picks that you keep your fingers crossed on. But, likely not the best draft capital as we sit here right now.